Hello. For those of you that are new to my channel, my name is Tammy and I like to do videos that show you my process for different pieces that I make, and I provide helpful tips as well as occasional tool review. I have geared these to the beginner, so if you're not a beginner this may go a little slow pace for you, but I do like to go through every step of my process. A viewer came to me recently and asked me to do a voiceover for one of the Watch Me Work series that I did, and this was for the Moon Phases cuff. And this is just an etched piece, so it's fairly simple to do, no soldering involved, just a bit of preparation work and then working with some interesting chemicals to get that lovely etched piece when you're finished. So this particular video is one of two parts, and I'll be covering the actual image creation. So I'll take you through all the steps that I used to create the moon phases image, and then I show you how to prepare the metal and then how to apply that toner to the metal piece itself. And then finally we finish getting the metal ready to put into the etchant bath. So let's get started. When I created my Moon Phases cuff, I started out by creating the images I needed for the resist in preparation for etching. The program I use is Silhouette Studio Business Edition, but you could use the basic free version. There are many other image editing software packages you could use, but this is the one I am most comfortable with. If you are using another program, you will need to determine how to do the same steps within that software. I have an image here that I've already created, but I'm going to use this as a reference as I create a new one for you. So this particular cuff that I made was 5.75 inches long. I'm going to make the new one 6 inches long because that's the standard length for a cuff. The one that I made previously was made for someone who had really small wrists, so I went with a smaller size. The first thing that I want to focus on is creating the frame for the cuff. In this particular case, I had a 1/2 inch sterling silver bracelet blank that I used, so I'm going to go with that size again, but this time I'm going to make it 6 inches long. So I'm going to start with the rectangle, and I like to do a rounded edge on the cuff so that there's no sharp points. So we're going to draw a rounded rectangle, and we can choose that from the tools menu, the drawing tools menu on the left side of the screen. So we select the rounded rectangle, and I'm just going to draw a size. It doesn't matter what size I draw here because I can refine the size in the upper panel. So I want this to be 6 inches wide, and you notice that I don't have the aspect ratio locked because I want to be able to modify the height and width independently. So the width is going to be 6 inches, and then the height is going to be 0.5 inches. And enter that, and this is my rectangle. Now I don't like them rounded quite as much as this one is, so I'm going to bring those edges in and just slightly round the corners. You can just, whatever you prefer. Alright, so now I have my rounded rectangle. Alright, and the next thing I want to do is I want to select this rectangle, and I actually want to make an inner frame. I want this edge, this thick edge around here, not to be etched, so I can use the offset panel. It's this little star shape in the right hand navigation panel. And if I click that, I can apply an offset, which is an outside offset, or an internal offset. So we're going to choose internal offset here. Now by default, it gives you a distance of 0.125 inches, which you see is entirely too wide. So I'm going to reduce this down to 0.050, and I could just enter that number in. Alright, so now that I have the size that I want, I just click apply, and now I have two rectangles, one nested inside of the other, and they're perfectly aligned. So they're aligned center and top to bottom. What I want to do now is I actually want to make this a frame. If I fill this back rectangle at this point, we'll fill it black and I'll show you. It actually fills the entire rectangle, but what I want to do is I want to cut this center rectangle out so that I only have a black frame. And I can easily do this by selecting both shapes and going to Object, Modify, and then Subtract. And it's going to subtract that second image that I drew from the first. So now I have an actual frame, and if I pull this over, you can see it is a frame. And it has subtracted that piece from the original rectangle. What I want to do now is go ahead and change the color of the line to black as well, because I don't want a red line. Alright, let's close this line style box. So I've got my frame, and the next step is to create the moons. Very easy to do. So I'm going to start by drawing a circle, and I'll choose this from the drawing tools and select the ellipse option. Now if I just simply draw a circle, I may not get a perfect circle. So what I want to do is I want to hold the shift key down while I draw this circle, and I get a perfectly round circle. So I'm just gonna throw a shape out there. I'm not worried about size at this point. I'm going to reference the one that I did here. Let me ungroup all of this, and then I can choose this circle to see what size it is. So it's 0.320. So I know that's a good size. I'm going to resize this circle to 0.320. So if I select it, I can change my dimensions, but this time I want to lock the aspect ratio. Change this to 0.320, and it will change both the height and the width. So now I have a perfect circle. So this is the base of my moon, and this will be used for creating each sliver. So at this point I want to copy, and I'm going to just use Control C and then Control V to paste, and then I'll paste another one. Alright, so what I want to do is I want to overlap these circles to get the sliver cut out that I want. So I think that looks pretty good. And I'm going to copy these two, and I'm going to align them. So Object, Align, and I'm going to align the top. Now before I do anything else, I'm going to make a copy of these two, because I'll keep repeating this process. So copy, paste, so Control C, Control V, and I'm going to move that out of my way. These two are aligned. So now what I want to do is I want to go back to Object, Modify, and Subtract. And remember, that's going to subtract away from the base shape, or the first shape that I drew. Alright, so I've cut a sliver out, but I think that I want to take a little bit more. So I'm going to make a copy of this top one, paste that again, I'm going to align these. So I'm going to select them both, Object, Align, Top, and I can adjust this using my left and right arrows to get it where I want. And I think that's where I want it. So I'm going to select these again, Object, Modify, Subtract. Okay, I like that shape better. So I'm going to move this up out of my way. All right, so the next slice, I am going to copy these again, Control C, Control V. All right, so these should be aligned, but I'm just going to move this in a little bit to get my next slice of moon. All right, let's go a little more, just play around with it. I'm going to make sure these still are aligned. So Object, Align, Top, and then Object, Modify, Subtract. All right, so there's my next slice. Again, copy, paste, and we'll move this one in even more. Align them, Object, Align, Top, and then Object, Modify, Subtract. And then one more slice. So since I'm not going to make any more slices, I can just use this one that I have, make sure that it's aligned. Well, actually, let's move it first. And I just want a sliver. Let's align them, Object, Align, Top, Object, Modify, Subtract. All right, there's my last sliver. And then you notice I have this last piece here. Copy, paste, and I can move that over. All right. So what I'm going to do at this point is I'm going to fill all of these moons with the exception of the last one and make them black. And then I'm going to select all of them and make the line black. So this is the line dialog box or the line panel. And I selected the color. And then I can choose black. So now the lines are black, the fill is black, but I want that line to be thicker. So I can actually change the thickness of the line here. And I'm going to bump this up to 1 point. So nice and thick. So the next thing I'm going to do is click off of those, and I want to replicate these moons over onto the left side. So I'm going to select all of them except for the full moon, and I'm going to go to Object, Replicate, and Mirror Left. So this will make a copy of all of those, and then if I select inside, they're all selected at this point, and I can just move them over. Alright, so I've got all my moons moved over. Let that go. So let's align these. Object, Align, Top, and let's take a look at them. Now we'll want to align them all horizontally so that they're spaced evenly, but I want to kind of see how wide I want these. And this is a little bit wider cuff, so the spacing can be a little bit more. I think I like that end spacing. So I have them all selected. I'm going to go back to Object, Align, and Space horizontally, and that spreads them out evenly between the first and the last item selected. So I like how those look. I'm going to go ahead and group them. I'm grouping them so it makes it easier to move them up into my frame. But the last thing I need to do with these moons is I do want a line that connects the first moon to the last moon. And I'm going to use the line tool to do this. So I select the draw a line from the line tool. And then I just select the edge of this moon carefully. And then draw a line across to the last moon. Now look at the left-hand side of this line and you can see it's giving you a dimension. Right now it says 0.004. I want to move this until that goes away. Alright, so I shifted it up just ever so slightly. Now it has no dimension. I know that this is a perfectly straight line and I can let that go. And I'm going to change the color of this line. Actually, I'm going to bump up the thickness of the line first to 1 point. And then I'm going to change the color to black. Now you can kind of see on this left side, I don't know if you can see it, but there's just a slight little piece of that line showing at the end. I'm going to change it to the select tool, and that will allow me to just nudge it ever so slightly to get rid of that little bump out. Alright, so I've got my line, and now I want to make sure that my line is centered within the center of these moons. Now I already grouped these moons so they're a single item. I can basically select both by selecting the moons and then hold down the shift key and select the line, or I can simply just draw a line around them to make the selection and make sure that I've got both items selected. And then I want to go to Object, Align, and then I want to align the middle. Alright, so it shifted it up just a little bit, and now I know that my line is centered. So now that I have those centered, aligned where I want it, spaced where I want it, I want to go ahead and group this again. Object, Group. So now it's just a single image. And I can move this up into my frame. Alright, so I've got my moons, I've placed them inside the frame. Now I want to go ahead and align these moons to the frame. So I select them both. Let's close out this line style. Object, Align, and I want to align center and middle. I want everything centered. Alright, so now I've got a perfectly centered moon phases within my frame. So the next thing that I want to do is I want to add some little stars at the ends of the cuffs, just for a little something extra. And I already have an image that I downloaded from a subscription service that I belong to, and it's just different stars. Now with this image, the background is dark and the image itself is light. And I can't get a good trace with this type of image. I need a light background and a dark image on that light background. But there are tools available, at least in the business edition, that allows you to inverse that image. So the image effects panel, I'll open that. And the first thing that I want to do is I want to go ahead and make this grayscale. Let's select the image first, change it to grayscale, hit apply. Always hit apply before going to the next little section or tab, or image effect, I should say. I can bump up the contrast here so I get a darker black. Apply that, and then I can invert the image. So what this is going to do is going to make the white black and the black white. So invert the image, all the way over to 100% and apply. Alright, so this gives me a much better image to start with when it comes to tracing. And you want a very high contrast image when you're tracing. So I've got this trace panel here on the right hand side. Let's open that trace panel and then use the select trace area to select the stars that I want to bring in. So the first set of stars, I like these top two. I'm going to trace around both of them. And you'll see that it kind of fills it yellow. It shows you where it's going to trace. If I can, I usually bump the trace threshold up a bit to make sure that it's getting details. And then you can hit the trace entire image button here. And you can see there's red around the stars. I want to trace another set of stars as well. So let's select trace area again. Let's trace around these bottom 4 stars. Let's bump that threshold up. Okay, and hit trace. Alright, so now that I have the stars traced that I want, I can just move this original image out of the way, and I can actually select it and delete it. Alright, let's move these down. What I want to do is, since I trace them as a single image, they're showing up as a single image, and I want to break these stars apart. So I'm going to go into Object, Release, Compound Path. And now you see that I have 2 stars here. I can select them individually. Same with this one. I select it. It's all one image. I go into Object, Release Compound Path, and now all of these stars are individual images. I'm not going to use this particular one, I know already, so I'm just going to go ahead and get rid of it. But these stars I do want to use, and I'm going to select them all. I'm going to go ahead and change the fill color, so I go to the Open Fill panel, change it to black. Then I open the line panel and change that color to black. I don't need to adjust the line thickness for these. Alright, this is a lot bigger image than my moon cuff. I know because I brought it in. If you look at my page, it's like 19 inches by 11 inches. So I'm going to select all of these and reduce the size before I bring them over to the other page. And while they're all selected, I'm going to hit Control C to copy, and I'm going to switch back to my moon phases cuff. I'm going to zoom out a bit, and then I'm going to Control V to paste my stars. They're still big, but I can get a better idea now how small I need to make them. So let's reduce these down, let's move these up, and let's zoom back in. And I like to use the zoom that has the mouse picture, and what I can do is I can select the area that I want to zoom into. Okay, so here are my stars. They're still kind of big, so let's make them smaller. Okay, now I can start moving these stars around and just placing them wherever I want them. And you may want to change individual star sizes. Let's see, so this all one size. Nope. Alright, I moved that one, but that's a bunch of different stars. I'm going to group these stars back together. So select around them, Object, Group. Same with this grouping of stars. Select Object, Group, and this set of stars. Object, Group. All right, so now I can move this entire piece over. So let's just put this up here. This one here. So you can play around with whatever image. If you're going to put an image, it doesn't even have to be stars. Whatever you'd like. All right, so just a little bit of adjustment here. All right, I like those stars. I'm going to select them all. So I'm selecting within that frame. I've got them all selected. I'm going to group them. So object, group, and I want to flip the image to put on the other side. So by doing that, we go to object, replicate, and then mirror right. So it's going to make a copy. It's going to mirror it, and then you can move it wherever you need to. Let's get rid of this line style, and let's just adjust. All right, so now I've got my finished image for my moon phases cuff. I can get rid of this one, and I had ungrouped it, so I'm going to just select it all, get rid of that one. I don't need that one anymore. It was just for reference. And I want to go ahead and select everything, object, group. What I like to do is I like to make multiple copies. Let's zoom out. So that when I print them, if I happen to get a bad print, I don't have to print again. I can potentially increase my chances of getting a good print. So I'm going to copy this by using Control C and then Control V and then Control V again. I usually make at least 4 copies, and I think I'm a little OCD, so I like to line everything up. So object, align left, and then object, align space vertically. So now I have my file ready to print. You want to print this out on a LaserJet printer. An inkjet will not work for the resist method that I'll be using, but you want it to print at the best quality and the darkest that you can possibly print. When I'm ready to print, I use Glossy Magazine Paper as my print media, and I get these magazines for free through my community. And so I just find a page that has really light background colors on it and just tear that out of the magazine. And then I just take that over to my printer and load it as if it were regular printer paper. You want to use the highest quality paper you can find. So you just file, print, and then select your printer, and then select print. And now you're ready for the next phase. Since we're not using standard printer paper, just keep an eye on your printer to make sure that there's no issues with the paper going through or that it doesn't get stuck in the printer. If there's a lot of warping or wrinkling, the glossy paper may not be thick enough. Now it's time to get the sterling silver blank prepared for the resist to be applied. And I use my ultrasonic cleaner for this. I just heat up the solution. It's an ammonia solution, and I will put that recipe in the details of this video. But you want to use a brass brush, a jeweler's brass brush, not one of the brass brushes, that's a tongue twister, that you get at a local hardware store because they're too stiff. But a jeweler's brass brush is nice and soft and will help you get that really clean. I also will use a Scotch-Brite pad and go over it really well in addition to the brass brush. What you're trying to do is get all of the oils and dirt removed from that silver piece. You're also trying to give it a tooth so that that resist will stick to it really well without lifting. So just spend some time here, be very thorough, make sure you get the edges really well as well, and you should have a successful transfer. If you don't have an ultrasonic cleaner, it's not necessary. Just make sure you heat up that ammonia solution. When you're finished cleaning the piece, just rinse it off under the sink, trying your best not to touch that silver now that it's nice and clean. That's why I have one glove on, so I can handle it with the gloved hand. Now that your silver is all nice and clean, you want to transfer the image from the magazine paper to the silver blank. We do this with a laminator. The one that I have is I've had for probably more than 20 years, but it works really well. You can do some research online to find the best laminators, but I think that the cheap ones don't work as well as some of the more expensive ones. Pretty standard, right? So I just wipe off that silver with denatured alcohol and get that surface a little wet. I'm just trying to remove any remaining debris that may be left over. And I've already trimmed my image, and I just place it on the blank. It can be a little fiddly at this stage. Try to get it placed as perfectly as possible. And once you have it in place, you're just going to come back over the top of that paper and just kind of dab that denatured alcohol onto the top of it. You want to try and wet the paper a little bit. You don't want it soaking wet, but you're trying to just kind of soak through. That helps keep it in place, and I think it may actually help it adhere when it goes through the laminator. So just spend a little bit of time just pressing that down, and you'll actually see the image show through the back if it's not too dark. Once we're ready placing that image onto the silver, we want to place this in the carrier sheet. Make sure that your laminator is on and heating. I use the foil setting on mine because it gets a little bit hotter than just the regular laminate setting. But just carefully place that silver sheet in the carrier, trying not to move that paper image at all. And once your laminator is heated, mine has a ready indicator that will turn on, then we can start passing the carrier sheet through the laminator. This blank happens to be 19 gauge in thickness. I've passed as much as 18 gauge through this laminator, so your laminator will determine how thick of a metal you can pass through it, but no problems with the 19 gauge. You kind of push it a little bit to get it in and get it started, but it will usually pull it through with no issues. I have a tendency to pass mine through 5 times, and that's just to make sure that enough heat and pressure is applied to transfer that image to the silver with no issues. As you're passing the metal through the laminator, be very careful because it gets extremely hot, especially after that 5th pass. So once you're finished, you can then take an extra step to make sure that it's transferring by using the back of a piece of vinyl, the transfer paper, and then just use something like a bone folder or maybe chopsticks, even the back of a spoon, and burnish that down onto the metal. And this just makes sure that the image is being transferred properly. When you heat it up, the plastic toner melts onto the metal surface. And it looks like we've got good adherence. And the next step will be to place this in some cold water so that we can soak that paper and then rub that paper away from the metal. After letting your piece soak in the water a little bit to soften that paper up, you can easily start to remove the paper from the toner that's remaining on the silver by just rubbing your finger across the surface of the paper. This works even better if you have gloves on because it gives a little more resistance. But you want to just work that until you get all that paper removed. You definitely want all of the paper removed from the spots that have no toner. There may still be a film of paper on those toner spaces, but that's not a big deal. It will not affect the etching process. So just keep doing this until you get all of that paper cleaned off the piece, and then we can dry it and get it ready for the next phase. After I have the piece dried, I like to pass it through the laminator one last time just to make sure that everything is adhered as well as it can be. So I take the slick paper from the back of a piece of vinyl that I used before when I was burnishing the piece down and place it over the piece so that it doesn't stick to the carrier page. This is a really important step. I've done this and I've messed it up. So I put that piece on and then I pass it back through the laminator one last time. So if you roughed any of that toner up when you were removing the paper, now's an opportunity to get that heated and bonded back down to that silver piece. Now that we have the image adhered to the metal, it's time to finish preparing it to place in the etchant. So I like to mask the back of my pieces with a piece of vinyl. I use Oracal, I think it's Oracal 651. It works really well. So I just cut a piece to place on the back, cut out a section of vinyl that will be large enough to cover the entire back piece of the blank. We're not worried about perfection at this point. We just want to rough out a piece that will cover the back. We want to be careful not to scuff up the front of our piece, so place it on something that is not rough, that's nice and smooth, and then just remove the backing from the vinyl and then place it on the back of our silver. You want to burnish this down to make sure that it adheres well, and you want to try and not get any air bubbles in it. It's next to impossible not to get any, but try and minimize the amount of air bubbles that you get. And just trim away the excess vinyl. Easy to do, just take an X-Acto knife and trim along the edges of the silver. I'm just going to use a paint pen to fill in any spots along the side where I may not have gotten this perfectly straight and there's any silver showing. This will also act as a resist. You could use a Sharpie, but it doesn't hold up that well in the etchant for sterling silver. So I like to use these paint pens. You could also use these paint pens to just draw a design on your piece. One more step in getting our piece ready to suspend in the etchant. So turn the piece over. Make sure that the vinyl is adhered really well to the back side. And then take a piece of string and tie a knot in one end of it. And we're going to attach the string onto the back of this so we can suspend the piece. But you want to tie the knots in the string to keep the string from slipping out of the tape that we're going to use to adhere it to the back. So I'll also put a second knot towards the top. This is just a little extra security. And I just use a piece of packing tape. I like to use packing tape because it's much stronger than just regular tape. So I use that to place over where I tied the knots. Now the piece is ready for suspension in the etchant.